Okay, so we'll now then return to the agenda item serious acquisitive crime, and this is outlines the current position in relation to a number of crime categories.
Yes.
Over to you.
Okay, so this is the first time, Commissioner, that this has been on a community outcomes meeting, unlike the next paper where it's been before. So the paper that you've already had a copy of just leads through what is a serious acquisitive crime. So it just leads through around theft, around robbery and around burglary. So it's clear for the public which is which offence, because sometimes there's been a little bit of confusion.
Yeah.
The report then talks about the National Crime Recording Standards, because everybody has seen crime go up. Certainly at bar 3 of the 43 forces, the rest of the police forces up and down the country have seen increases, and we're in line with those increases there or thereabouts. What we do though, and it's on paragraph 6, what we tend to do on a regular basis is look at calls for service versus what crimes recorded. So we try to track and mirror, and Jane Sykes and the team look at what a call comes in as, and therefore what's the outcome of that call, and is it recorded correctly. Yeah. Of the 28% increase in crime, the team will say around 4% of that is actually down to being more likely to be a victim of crime. So 24% is suggested, due to the analysis that Jane and the team have done, is around the CDI effect, is around better and more reflective crime recording. And then the report goes on to break down the various crime types within that overarching umbrella of serious acquisitive crime. So it talks...
Sorry, so to be clear, the period we're talking about here is up until the end of March?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
15-16 compared to 14-15.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's 28%,
yeah.
But 4% is a real increase.
Yes.
So if you were to ask, are you more likely to be a victim of crime last year compared to the year before, by 4% is what the analysis tells us. On paragraph 12 onwards of the report, it does give a little bit more information around crime data integrity and where we are currently at with that. And then when I get to the various crime types, I'll be able to talk about how compliant we are. Because I think that's really important, because some of these offences now are recorded at source and some are recorded by officers later on in the process. In relation to where we sit nationally, you will be aware, Commissioner, on the iQuanta data, we're in a group of more similar forces in our more similar group. So there's effectively us and 7 other forces, and they're listed at paragraph 16 for you. But they're basically South Yorkshire, Northumbria, Lancashire, South Wales, Greater Manchester, so GMP, Nottinghamshire and West Midlands. Paragraph 17 talks about that in relation to domestic burglary, when we're looking at a number of crimes per household, we are ranked 7th out of 8, so that would tend to suggest we've got higher burglary levels compared to our group. In relation to robbery, we are ranked 6th out of 8, and then theft of and theft from vehicles high, because we're 8th out of 8. So 1 is good, that's low numbers, 8 is high. But when you look at our satisfaction levels about how we deal with victims of crime, we're ranked 3rd out of the 8. So whilst we might have high numbers, which we know some of that is down to crime data integrity and the recording, our victims are at the higher end of being happy about how we deal with them from a satisfaction point of view. And that's at sort of 91%, nearly 92%, which I think is very impressive. Mm-hmm. The report then talks a little bit around crime prevention, and there is an overlap with some early intervention work we've started to look at around crime prevention, and I believe, as being the crime prevention lead for the force, that it's an area that we've probably underinvested in over the years a little bit, just because of the budget issues, etc. But it's an area which we are now reinvesting in with some new staff to work with Chris Joyce, who I know you've met previously, and for staff to work out at district to really fulfil some more crime prevention work.
And certainly in the conversations around the consultation on the police and crime plan, I think it will be an area that we will absolutely revisit in terms of our strategy and investment.
Well, the crime prevention strategy for this year was refreshed at the start of the year, and I think is just about
next Tuesday.
Just about to be signed off,
yes.
With a focus on this area and one or two others. But I do think it's something where we could give some further thought around our agenda around volunteering, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That crime prevention strategy is intertwined and interlinked with the problem-solving strategy that's due at the Chief Officer team next Tuesday, and it will be spoken about as well with staff on Friday at the neighbourhood event, because it's intrinsically linked to neighbourhood policing.
Yeah.
So if it's okay, Commissioner, if I can go on to the breakdowns of the various areas from page 5 onwards, paragraph 26.
Yeah.
Okay, so in relation to robbery, in relation to those offences, we saw a plateau in 2014 and then a slow rise through 2015. So it's a total increase of 13%. I have asked the question around that, have we seen a decrease then in the theft from person? And that is the case. So therefore, whilst personal robberies may have gone up slightly, theft from persons, which is the other sort of the mirrored category, has tailed off somewhat. The report then breaks down when these offences are most likely to happen, which are of an evening time, so 5 till 10 p.m. It will be no surprise to yourself around that cash, mobile phones are the most likely taken item, and then 31% of personal robbery victims are females, but the bulk of the victims are young males between 16 and 25, which is the same picture nationally. And then when you look at have we got any spikes anywhere in particular, because that's certainly of interest to me being district policing lead, Calderdale does show an increase of 83%, which is huge, but it's actually only an increase of 6 offences. So we are talking, penny numbers there. Obviously not if you're a victim, but it's only 6 offences. It's not in the double figures or anything like that. In relation to burglary, which is paragraph 32 onwards, it talks about West Yorkshire Police recording 2% more burglary, domestic burglaries in April 16 compared to April 15, so a very slight increase there. And it talks about it rising again as the nights drawing, so October, November, which is what we see every year, seasonality, and then early spring again, which is a pattern that we see year in, year out, as does every force. It then talks a little bit around opportunistic offences, unlocked doors and insecure windows, which again, it's a real issue, and that was part of our summer burglary campaign last year and our Darker Nights campaign that I know you were involved with last October, to actually say, please lock your windows, please lock your doors, and you can help yourself in relation to this. And that's a message we continue to push. But what we find is some communities choose to just not lock the door or lock the windows in certain areas. I know some of the ward officers have worked very hard with that, trying to raise awareness for our public. The report talks about times of day when they happen, and that a quarter of offences are the Europrofile snaplock offences. That's come down over the years. At one point that was a lot higher than a quarter of offences, but at the moment it's around 1/4 of offences. And then on paragraph 38, it does talk about 10% of burglaries involving the theft of vehicle keys or taking a vehicle off the driveway or from outside the house, which we refer to locally as Hanoi offences. And then theft from vehicles under the vehicle crime category decreased by 5% for theft from vehicle, which it's a mixed bag nationally, but we are down by 5% for theft from vehicle. But it does talk about the fact that Ford Transits are the main targeted vehicle in West Yorkshire, and tends to be a North of England issue actually. It's not just us, it's other forces within the North as well. But does talk about the fact that we have high levels of registration plate offences, and on paragraph 43 it talks about that where registration plates are stolen, nearly 40% of those are used in a further crime, such as make off without payment. So that's on the forecourts of petrol stations. So if a registration plate goes, you know, it would be likely to be used in a theft of a petrolator at a garage. And then theft of vehicle, this is where it has been recorded as a 48% increase in relation to theft of motor vehicles. So you would expect us to have done a little bit of work around that to try and unpick it, because it is, you know, a big volume of offences. And when we have unpicked that, everywhere's seeing increases across the board. But what we have done, we've been able to effectively look at not where the bulk of the offences have taken place, but for some patterns. So, for example, Leeds has issues in relation to motorbikes being stolen, Wakefield vehicle parts, Kirklees plant and associated items, Calderdale Land Rovers and Bradford, where the handlers of these stolen vehicle parts and these stolen vehicles, it's moved from one to the other. So what I've been able to do via force tasking is allocate the 5 DCIs for volume crime at the 5 districts an area of this, because it's far too big just for one DCI, one area to take on, and that's in paragraph 56.
But on the face of it, they're real increases, not to
They
do
are-
with crime data
increases,
recording.
yes.
Yeah.
They are
Yeah.
real increases.
Yeah.
Just in relation to theft of vehicle, over the years we have seen it come down quite a lot because of better security from the manufacturers of vehicles. So any spike would have looked out of kilter, but clearly 48% is not where we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then at the back you've just got the data which backs up the narrative I've just given you, Commissioner.
Okay. Right, well, thank you for that report. And, you know, I do welcome the format and the way it's come to this community outcomes meeting. So perhaps I'll just follow up with a few questions. Again, you've touched on throughout the report the business of the national crime recording standards,
Yes.
and there's still clearly an impact of that. So I accept that, albeit as we move on now, that should, in theory, become less because of the new baseline, as it were. So it's really around the compliance rates, the first question, for domestic burglary, and what other analysis takes place to ensure that any genuine rises are not missed.
So as we've reported in separate crime data integrity reports that have gone through to the Police and Crime Panel, the main compliance tested area is around when somebody picks up the phone to us to report a crime, it's classified as a crime incident log, and we track through that compliance from somebody ringing us as to what makes it through onto a crime report. So in terms of burglary dwelling, because that's the one around the integrity of CDI, about what box are the police putting it in. We're now reporting excellent gradings under the HMIC accredited method of compliance monitoring across all of the districts for burglary dwelling. And we're now increasingly seeing that across all crime types. So I'm really content that if somebody is reporting a burglary dwelling in West Yorkshire, it's getting recorded as a burglary dwelling. I'm increasingly less content that we can therefore be compared nationally, because the HMIC, whilst they're doing the compliance over here, when they're reporting iQuanta, they're not putting crime levels and compliance next to each other. So as you'll see increasingly in future reports, whenever we talk about recorded crime levels, we only want to see it in the context of how compliant is it to Home Office counting rules. Because if you know, as you would hold us to account, as we hold the districts to account, the recorded crime level is in some ways irrelevant unless we've got a high compliance level. And what we're not seeing nationally, and we'll keep coming back to this in other reports, is the ability to compare force on force in both numbers. We can record numbers, but they aren't prepared at this moment in time to compare CDI compliance. So it's an increasing challenge
yeah.
for us when you look at where are we in
Yeah.
the area. So when we talked the other week about domestic abuse, we're recording more domestic abuse than West Midlands Police. Is that more's occurring, more preparedness or more compliance? So it's harder. So in terms of the specifics of that question, yeah, we're really content, and the evidence base is there to show that we're at exactly the right numbers. So Leeds, as a way of an example, has shown and continued a long-term sustained reduction, and we're very proud of what they've achieved recently in Leeds, and that's with a very high 96.8% compliance. So that we know that there's genuine reductions in burglary dwelling across Leeds.
So I do think though that for the public this is quite confusing.
Yeah.
So Angela has just said, out of our most similar group of forces, which tends to be the larger metropolitan forces, we are currently sitting 7th out of 8th in terms of numbers. However, what we don't know is whether all of those other forces are as compliant with the process as we are, i.e. they've recorded it correctly. And when we talk about compliance, it is still possible to initially identify it as a domestic burglary, to finalise it as a domestic burglary, but under our process, unless there is good rationale and good investigation and everything else that sits behind it, you might still not be compliant. So we are being incredibly strict with ourselves around that particular issue, because we know that that's a huge concern for our inspectorate. One of the things I think that we will want to have with HMIC when they come to next inspectors is that conversation with them that they are content with our recording processes and practices, because clearly we then need to be able to go back to the public and say, whilst we may be 7th out of 8th, the concern isn't perhaps about the sheer volume of issues, it's making sure that we correctly identify, that we do everything around prevention that we can, and that we deal with things appropriately.
That's where it is, and the Chief's right, it is a devil's own job to try and get a clear and articulate narrative. The British Crime Survey is the survey that maintains its statistical validation. The police statistics lost thing. The Huddersfield Examiner, forgive me because it's not in the report, did a report the other week around British Crime Survey household crime in West Yorkshire is at 13%, and the national average is at 11%. So we're above the national average. So from a household crime point of view, you're more likely to be at risk of household crime. However, what they didn't say is it's even more so in Lancashire at 14%, higher than us. In the Metropolitan Police, the same at 13%. South Yorkshire, 14%. West Midlands, 15%. And only Greater Manchester Police and Nottinghamshire are lower. They're all in a bag of metropolitan forces, but it is a really hard narrative when some of the forces are held up in other ways around Lancashire. Yet, in terms of the members of the public, they have statistically said they're more likely to be at risk of a household crime. So it is I do apologise for the confusing picture, but I think the benefit of CDI alongside these figures is we are closer to exactly what it is and what's been recorded to us, and we just need to hold the line with that to say that we are really satisfied that our figures are right, and increasingly we're less satisfied to be able to be compared until there's an equitable narrative up and down the country about CDI.
And then when you overlay that with the calls coming in from the public and how that call is finalised, then actually those three data sets added together is very useful.
And when we get to vehicle crime again, we know where it's genuinely going up, and nobody's going to, try and dispute that.
No.
Yeah, I think, as you know, I wrote to the Chief HMIC, Tom Windsor, to remind him of what he'd said previously around being ruthless around inspections and making sure everybody's recording crime properly to the new standards. So I think for me, this is still worth pursuing, because if it is so important to the HMIC, and it should be important to the public because we all want to see a level playing field, then I don't understand why they are not prepared to publish crime recording compliance rates alongside the actual figures that have been produced. So I think that's something we should pursue, and I will work with you on that one.
And again, just by way of reassuring the public, we have a vested interest in getting this right. Our force values of fairness, integrity and respect. But actually, it's really important that our data set is accurate so that we can then best determine what resources need to go where.
Yeah.
So from our own point of view, we have a vested interest in getting this right.
Yeah, and for the new police and crime plan, it's crucial because clearly investment decisions will be largely based on figures and intelligence that we have to our grasp during that period as well. Right, I'll continue on. So page 7 of the report explains that West Yorkshire Police monitor information to identify the serious acquisitive crime patterns and location hotspots, Angela, that you referred to in the report, so that officers can be deployed accordingly. So the question is, given that there is certainly public concern around officer numbers and reduction in police visibility, perhaps you could explain a bit more about how you intend to use the style of targeted deployment that can address that, as well as hopefully reduction in crime as well.
Yeah, well, every day we've obviously got 5 districts, and every day they have a meeting regime which starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is chaired by a member of the senior leadership team, and they have meetings at 8 o'clock. We then have a force meeting at 9 o'clock with the chief officer team present, and then at lunchtime they do what they call a pace setter meeting, where they look at resources from the morning and the late turn coming on. They do the same again at 4:30 and then 10:30 at night. So I'm happy being the district policing lead that there is some group and scrutiny at the 5 districts around crime and calls that are coming in, where offenders are, where victims are, what crimes are being recorded, and therefore that the resources are being overlaid appropriately, whether they are visible resources as in PCSOs, ward officers in yellow jackets, or alternatively patrol officers or CID or specialist resources. At 10 o'clock each day as well. On top of that, we have a force tasking meeting, which is 10 o'clock every day, where the resources from Ops at Cargate and roads policing will be allocated, and that, whilst we don't want to be knee-jerking hour by hour, actually it gives us that flexibility to be able to deploy our finite resources appropriately in line with threat, harm and risk. On the back of that as well, we have a monthly tasking meeting which looks at longer term crime plans and longer term nominals, and the districts can bid into that process, and often when they bid into that process they will get given some covert assets, so they're able to use the finite covert assets, whether that's surveillance or a crime team, to look at specific nominals which are causing us most harm across the districts. That's how it tends to work day by day. And then on the back of that, the 5 commanders who are either chair or they are joint chair of the community safety partnerships also have standing items on their regular community safety partnership meetings around how the partnership can work together. Because it's not just about policing, tackling these offences in the communities, it's about the wider partnership, whether that's a local authority or fire or health, to be able to contribute and to be one team. And we have joint tasking throughout the day with our co-located neighbourhood teams as well.
Right. So, well, thanks for that. And so, you think that current mix then of the tasking and the intelligence and the way it's structured is you know, pretty set up to deliver that?
I do. I think I would prefer more intelligence coming in, and it's something I talk about with my 5 commanders every month at the local accountability meetings, when we talk about level of intelligence items and forms coming into the system. We would always want more. But the officers, we have seen some green shoots recently around officers putting intelligence in from their mobile devices out on the street, which is useful to allow us to populate the system, you know, in a timely manner. So whilst they're getting to grips with the new devices, I think they will only go up. We have seen some green shoots at certain districts with that.
Okay.
I do think, though, Commissioner, that it would be remiss of me not to put a little bit of a caveat on all of this, and this is about when we have the capacity and capability to be able to task. From time to time, we are seeing some of our officers and resources quite stretched, not necessarily because of what we would call a critical incident, you know, something significant, like a significant fire, but actually volume of other inquiries that we're having to take on, and missing from home is a particular example of this. So, for example, yesterday at the 9 o'clock meeting, the district commander said that one of his main concerns that morning was the 18 missing from home people just within the Bradford district. So that then potentially skews some of our activity. And clearly what we really need to be thinking about is the prevention agenda. How do we stop people going missing from home at all? And this isn't just necessarily domestic settings, it can be homes, it can be hospitals, it can be a number of places. And I think actually from a partnership point of view, I would hope that we could have a conversation about that perhaps at PEG at some point to see what other partners could contribute as well.
I think I've already suggested that we need to organise a key event around this because one, we need to find better solutions, but secondly, there are other agencies, other groups out there that frankly should be taking more of a role around these constant missing person reports that come in day by day.
Well, you know, we all have a collective interest in wanting to reduce the degree of vulnerability that some people find themselves in. And obviously, for obvious reasons, when somebody is reported as missing, we have to fear the worst and go out there and do our very best to try and locate people. That then means that those resources aren't then going to be available to be tasked in the way that Angela's just described. No, I think the whole missing persons agenda and the impact it has, in this case on the police, which we know is significant, just one example that you've quoted, we have to address this in a more strategic and joined up way, because there must be things that can be put in place to reduce this occurrence. I'm absolutely certain of it.
But I do think as well with the partners and missing people, which is a big drain on our resource, but it's right that we do that. We had a partnership afternoon that I know people from your office were at over at Havertop, and the 5 partnerships came to that. So we had an array from the people of children's social care managers and head of children's social care at various districts, and they gave an outline as to plans they were and work streams they were undertaking. And I was quite impressed with that, as certainly within Leeds and Bradford, the amount of work that had already been done, and the other districts were also on with that, which was quite reassuring really.
Yeah, we need to follow through on that and find out exactly what it is that's in the pipeline, what more we need to do, and start looking at putting some better solutions in place. Okay, thank you. I'll carry on with a further question. So again, Angela, you touched on the business of the theft of vehicles rise 39%, which is one of the largest ones I think that I'm aware of. And it is by all accounts a genuine increase. But again, you talked about some of the work that West Yorkshire Police is doing to try and tackle this by allocating resources in each district with these different categories of crime or vehicle-related crime. So in Leeds, for example, you said about looking at the theft of motorbikes, Wakefield, looking at the theft of vehicle parts. So really it's just a bit more detail around the individual action plans and providing a bit more reassurance that we are learning across our districts in a timely way, and that we can, try and address these increases, and also to throw into that clearly the big investment we've made in automatic number plate recognition systems, and I visited them again very recently to hear about some of the good work that they're doing, particularly around false number plates. So really it's to get beneath some of that
Well, all the partnership working areas have all got their own ward plans, which the MPT inspectors hold, and the PCFOs that are allocated now across the district work towards those with the ward officers. And then on top of that, we've been doing a lot of work, as you quite rightly say, around ANPR, because we've got much better coverage now and better kit. And the ANPR team do a lot of work on that. And that's 24/7. It doesn't just finish at midnight, it runs right through. And we get a morning update every morning at 7 o'clock as to the activity that's happened in the previous 24 hours. On the back of that, I know Kirk Lees have had quite a lot of success, and they've invested quite heavily in extra roads policing officers to be able to do that. As of Bradford, because what it's theft of vehicles, so some of the vehicles in Bradford in Operation Steerside have been stolen vehicles that we've seized, whether it's no insurance or a stolen vehicle or a disqualified driver, and they're quite interlinked. I know quite a lot of the other council areas now have said, why can't we have Bradford Operation Steerside? And they're starting to look at that. And I know Calderdale have asked for some more coverage, and they've been able to use some of their underspends in their overtime to be able to address that. So I think it is interlinked with roads policing, with Operation Steerside, but also back to neighbourhoods as well, to make sure there are some proper plans in place. But we shouldn't forget crime, protective services criming all of this around our covert assets as well. So we are looking at that.
It feels, Commissioner, that we have got a significant amount of organised criminality around this particular crime type, and better being able to map out who our organised criminals are. This probably isn't unique to West Yorkshire at the moment. We've got some good intelligence that suggests we have got people travelling some distances to steal vehicles to order. Now, I think a combined approach from raising public awareness to make sure that they are aware of some of the options that they might have to try and reduce the possibility of them becoming a victim, to looking at the intelligence and what that tells us, to trying to ensure that the moment a vehicle is reported as stolen, we are aware of it in terms of our intelligence system, so some of our tactics can be used, right the way through to what else can we actually do to try and reduce the possibility of the vehicles being stolen in the first place. But what this is telling us at the moment is there is a significant market somewhere for all of these vehicles, and so it is a national issue that we're looking at as well.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and yeah, it can be quite complex in terms of the sort of things that are being targeted by the criminals under the umbrella of vehicle crime. But you know, I think given the ANPR investment, I would hope we're in a position to really, pardon the pun, make some big inroads into some of these activities. But no, thanks for that.
We have had response. Some operations with GMP in Lancashire as well. So we're not just looking at Yorkshire and the Humber. And it is the whole of the north of England that have seen rises, but we have worked with Lancashire on a job just recently around plant and transit vans. Yes,
and I saw an operation that I think was on one of the BBC programmes about that. Yeah. Okay, just to carry on then around the, so you mentioned in the report the 10.7% increase in domestic burglary, and again I won't go into all the crime recording aspects, but there does appear to be a big difference in the rates of increase between Bradford and Wakefield, for example, respectively, and then Leeds, being stable at around about 0.3%, with the other districts into the 20+%. So, do you know what those differences are, and are we confident around the standard of crime recording in all the districts?
Yes, just obviously Mr Robbins talked about CDR and the compliance of being 96%. but I'm reassured that that's just not that one district's at 100% and one's 80%. They range between 95 and 99% to bring us back to an average of 96%. So they're all on the same page, which is good and positive. Leeds is appearing to sort of flatline with the burglary numbers, but that is because they saw a spike early. They sort of appeared to go early and had a lot of crimes recorded probably 18 months ago, and now things are starting to stabilise. And the reason why Leeds was that little bit different, a lot of it was around the student accommodation, where you'll recall if there's, say, a terraced house in Hyde Park with a landlord and 5 people rent 5 rooms, if those 5 people have a single rent agreement with the landlord and they all get a laptop taken each, it was 5 burglaries. Whereas now, if it's one Leeds student that has the agreement and then I effectively sublet 4 rooms off to my friends, it's just one victim and one crime. So that will balance back out, I feel, and we may even see a decrease in Leeds because they had the rises early. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a decrease in Leeds over the next 12 months because of the student accommodation, but still the sort of 95–96% compliance rate with CDI.
So it's students and timing,
I believe
basically, on the Leeds.
In relation to Leeds.
Okay. Similar then question around business robbery that looks to have reduced in all districts apart from Leeds on this occasion, where it's risen by about 33%. I mean, the numbers are not massive. We're talking about 280 recorded across the whole of West Yorkshire, but nonetheless, as we know, Leeds, you know, is a big business and economic centre in West Yorkshire. So it's really just some comments around that.
Yeah, well, I was surprised at that, to be honest, when I looked at the data sets when they came through last month. So I've asked for an extra piece of work doing on that, but it is 37 offences in total, so it's not huge, but it's still nonetheless, you know, noticeable. And I'm told it's just around local shops, small shops, no patterns, no specific locations, but I've just asked for a little bit extra work just around that to understand it further, because it's not clear from what I've been told.
Okay, so we'll get some more information on that. Yeah.
We're just reflecting on the types of reports that have been coming in from Leeds over the last 6 to 12 months. It does seem to have been local shops and actually some local garages. So I think the fact that Angela's commissioned that work is quite crucial. Yeah,
okay, thank you. And then I think the last question on this this agenda item. So personal robbery has increased by about 16.3%. But I think you've said that it's virtually all down to the crime recording standards, but my question is, how can you be certain that it is 100% of the rise that's down to that and not some of it being a genuine increase?
I think when you then overlay it with the calls for service coming in about a personal robbery on an individual, there's less calls for service coming in, but a slight increase in the robberies that are affected. So when you overlay the two, if you saw more calls coming in from the public and more crimes being recorded, it would indicate a genuine rise and you'd be more likely to be a victim of this sort of crime. But it goes the opposite way around to that. Fewer calls coming in from the public about it. Right,
so you're fairly confident on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right, thank you. Yeah, interesting report. Obviously a huge drive around the crime recording standards, which, you know, even though we've had to take some pain, it's well done on that and good work. But clearly, you know, there's a lot of work to do, and we will need to have some discussions going forward in the new police and crime plan, and obviously the budget decisions we make around where to invest wisely in some of these areas going forward.